Hello, my name is Juan José Rodríguez Torres. I'm currently studying a master's on Estudios de las Lenguas y Culturas Inglesas. I also have a BA on Docencia de Inglés como Lengua Extranjera, both from the University of Guadalajara. Today, I would like to introduce the topic that I will be developing for my master's degree thesis, which is on pedagogical translanguaging. By implementing this pedagogy, I expect for oral proficiency development in Mexican high school ESL learners. For my presentation, I will be using two principal authors who are Ofelia Garcia and Li Wei, authors who have conducted many research studies on translanguaging practices. First, I would like to start by mentioning what is translanguaging. In Wei's words, translanguaging creates a social environment for the multilingual language users by bringing different dimensions of their personal history, attitudes, beliefs, and ideologies. Not only that, but as well as their cognitive and physical capacity into one coordinated and meaningful performance. We could also add that translanguaging, based on Ofelia Garcia's description, is not the mere alternation of two separate languages, but rather the dynamic use of a bilingual's entire linguistic repertoire as a unified communicative system. Now, translanguaging by Garcia is considered a unified communicative system. However, in recent studies conducted by these two authors, as well as other authors, many pedagogical advantages have been found. Therefore, this study expects to find more advantages or pedagogical benefits while we are using translanguaging in the classroom. What is now pedagogical translanguaging? Well, pedagogical translanguaging is a theoretical and instructional approach that aims at improving language and content competence in a school context by using resources from the learner's whole linguistic repertoire. Baker claimed back in 2001 four educational advantages to translanguaging. The number one, it's that it encourages a more thorough and in-depth comprehension of the topic. Number two, it aids in the weaker languages development. Number three, it encourages collaboration and ties between the home and the school. And finally, it facilitates the assimilation of early learners with fluent speakers. So in all of these studies, there have been findings regarding the benefits of translanguaging. However, for our specific Mexican content, there has not been a lot of research conducted. That's why I'm going to explain a few details regarding the context and the problem statement for my thesis. First, I would like to say that, well, we all know that Mexico is home to over 60 indigenous languages alongside Spanish and, of course, expanding exposure to English. However, English as the second language practices in Mexico have promoted and steeped in monoglossic language ideologies, meaning that students are being limited to the use of English in the classroom exclusively. Also, the Mexican Planning Programa de Estudio promotes a more inclusive, critical, and intercultural approach to education. Nonetheless, ESL classroom in Mexico have limited the use of Spanish while working on learning the target language. That's why it goes again, the idea of the classroom being intercultural. And finally, there remains a gap between policy and classroom practices regarding multilingualism. My study expects to answer to these two research questions. Number one, what are the pedagogical benefits in oral proficiency development through the implementation of pedagogical translanguaging in the Mexican high school classroom? And number two, what is the relationship between language oral competence and translanguaging practices in the Mexican high school classroom. In order to obtain answers to these two answers, I'm going to tell you a brief description of the methodology that will be used. This study will be experimental and a qualitative study conducted in a public state high school, which also belongs to the Universidad de Guadalajara, by having only two groups conformed by 25 to 35 students, in which the age gap is from 15 to 18 years old. Since the age gap it goes from 15 to 18 years old, consent will first be obtained from the authority of the high school, as well as the parents of the learners that will be within this study. The study will be conducted through 15 sessions in the duration of 3 months. During these 3 months, different instruments will be used for the data collection. First, we have surveys that will help us to know a little bit about the language and personal background of the learners. Second, we'll have interviews to know a bit more about the learner's experience perspective through each session during these 3 months. Then we will also have questionnaires. This will be applied weekly as to know what is their experience throughout the week and how they felt with the use of translanguaging in the classroom. And finally, we would also use note-taking, this in order to find specific instances of the use of translanguaging for the analysis of it. Now, as any other study, we do have some limitations and perhaps the feasibility can decrease. These due to the limited use of translanguaging in the classroom. We expect to promote translanguaging through indirect translanguaging opportunities, such as adapted tasks, group work, and scaffolded activities. However, we're also limited by monoglossic ideologies that learners might have. These resulting in the resistance of the Spanish language used in the classroom. Now, finally, I would like to explain my expected contributions to three different areas, which would be first academic. The academic area will validate learners' cultural and linguistic repertoire, strengthening linguistic competence. We also have an expected contribution on the pedagogical side, which is to demonstrate concrete benefits for oral proficiency, encouraging teachers to embrace multilingual practices. And finally, the social political expectation, which would expand translanguaging research in Latin American contexts where scholarship is scarce. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you were able to find the information that you were looking for, and any questions or feedback will be received as well.